First Story, Lost in the Whispering Pines by Sarah Anderson. I grew up in a small town in Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains provided a natural playground for adventure seekers like myself. One summer, I decided to go camping in the dense pine forests of the San Juan National Forest, a place I'd often heard of but never explored. It was a clear, moonlit night when my friend Mark and I set out for our camping trip. The drive took us deep into the wilderness, far away from any signs of civilization. We parked our truck at the trailhead and began our hike, eager to find the perfect spot to set up camp. The whispering pines loomed over us as we ventured deeper into the forest, their thin branches casting eerie shadows on the narrow trail. Around midnight, we found a picturesque clearing next to a babbling brook. It was a spot that seemed too good to be true, with the moonlight dancing on the water. We set up our tents, lit a campfire, and started cooking our dinner. The crackling firewood and the distant hooting of an owl added to the serene ambience. We spent the evening sharing stories and sipping on hot cocoa. But as the fire died down, we noticed something odd. Faint whispers in the distance, like someone was having a conversation just beyond our line of sight. Mark and I exchanged puzzled glances, both of us suddenly alert. The voices grew more distinct and unsettling. We couldn't make out the words, but it was evident that something was amiss. Whoever was out there seemed to be moving closer to our camp. My heart began to race as I realized that it might not just be another camper lost in the woods. We decided to extinguish our campfire and retreat into our tents, ready to defend ourselves if necessary. In the darkness, the whispers grew even closer, sending shivers down my spine. I strained my ears to catch any clues about who or what was approaching. Then I heard the sound of footsteps, not just one person, but several. They seemed to be circling our camp. My mind raced, imagining all the terrifying scenarios. Were we being watched? Stalked by a group of hostile strangers? As the footsteps drew nearer, I could sense the tension in Mark's breathing. We had no cell reception, and the nearest ranger station was miles away. It was up to us to protect ourselves and figure out who or what was lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped into the dim moonlight. My heart sank as I saw a group of men, their faces hidden by shadowy hoods. I had no idea what their intentions were, but they weren't dressed like ordinary campers. They were dressed in dark, ragged clothing, and their silence was unsettling. I nudged Mark, and we both gripped our pocket knives, our only means of self-defense. The men seemed to be studying us, their eerie stillness making the situation even more unnerving. One of them finally broke the silence, speaking in a low, guttural voice. "What brings you to these woods, city folks?" His words sent chills down my spine, and I could feel Mark's tension beside me. We explained that we were just camping and meant no harm. But the men didn't seem convinced. They continued to circle our camp, speaking in hushed tones among themselves. We could hear fragments of their conversation, talk of the forest, its secrets, and something about protecting it. It was clear that we weren't welcome in their territory. My heart pounded as they began to close in on our tents, their intentions becoming all too clear. Mark and I knew we had to make a break for it before things took a darker turn. With a silent nod, we unzipped our tents and bolted into the darkness. We ran through the forest, our breaths ragged, the eerie whispers and footsteps following close behind. I could feel branches scratching at my skin and the uneven forest floor beneath my feet. It seemed like an eternity, but we eventually stumbled upon a ranger station. We banged on the door, and a startled ranger opened it. We explained what had happened, and they immediately contacted the authorities. The search for the strange men turned up nothing, and they remained a mystery. We were shaken and grateful to be safe, but the experience left us with lingering questions. Who were those men, and what were they protecting in the Whispering Pines? We may never know, but I'll never forget the night we were lost in the dark heart of the San Juan National Forest, surrounded by enigmatic and unsettling strangers. Second Story, Into the Silent Abyss by David Miller. It was a chilly autumn evening when my friends and I decided to go on a hiking trip in the remote woodlands of upstate New York. The Adirondacks were known for their stunning landscapes, but we were about to experience something far beyond the beauty of nature. Our group consisted of 4, including myself, Sarah, Mike, and Lisa. We had all been avid hikers, but this was our first time venturing into this particular area. The trailhead was miles away from the nearest town, and we were determined to escape the crowds and savor the solitude of the forest. The first few hours of the hike were serene. The sun cast long shadows as it began to set, and the rustling leaves beneath our feet created a soothing soundtrack. We marveled at the vibrant colors of the foliage, and the air was crisp and invigorating. As night began to fall, we realized we had underestimated the rapid descent of darkness in these woods. We hurriedly set up our camp, built a fire, and prepared dinner. The warmth and camaraderie of the firelight soon put our initial unease to rest. But as the hours passed, a strange quietness settled over the forest. It was not the usual hush of the night. It was an oppressive silence, as if the very woods were holding their breath. The rustling of leaves and the chirping of crickets had ceased, replaced only by our own whispers and the crackling of the fire. It was Lisa who first noticed the absence of sound. "This is weird," she remarked, looking around at the others. We all nodded in agreement, feeling the tension grow. As we sat in the flickering light of the campfire, a strange noise shattered the stillness. A low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. It was unlike any animal I had ever heard. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a knot of fear forming in my stomach. Mike, being the bravest of us, stood up and grabbed a flashlight. He began scanning the darkness beyond our campsite, his face a mixture of determination and apprehension. We strained our ears, trying to discern the source of the growling. Then we saw them, 2 pairs of eyes gleaming in the darkness, reflecting the flashlight's beam. They were low to the ground, and their menacing glow sent us into a panicked frenzy. The growling grew louder, more menacing, and it became clear that these were not ordinary animals. As our fear deepened, the creatures came into the light. They were wolves, but not like any wolves we had seen in documentaries or wildlife programs. They were massive, with mangy fur and a predatory hunger in their eyes. They circled our camp, growling and snapping their jaws. We realized that we were in a dangerous situation. The wolves were drawn to the scent of our food, and we had little to defend ourselves with. Mike brandished the flashlight like a makeshift weapon, but it was clear that it would do little to deter the hungry predators. With our hearts pounding, we decided to slowly back away from the fire, hoping to escape without provoking an attack. The wolves, however, were relentless, staying close, their eyes never leaving us. Our attempts to scare them away with shouts and thrown sticks were futile. We were now lost in the wilderness at night, surrounded by these menacing creatures. The adrenaline coursed through our veins as we stumbled through the dark, desperately searching for a way out. We knew that if we couldn't find safety soon, our encounter with these wolves could take a deadly turn. Hours passed, and our strength began to wane. The wolves remained close, their growls a constant reminder of the danger we were in. Finally, just as we were on the brink of exhaustion, we came across a remote cabin. It was a stroke of luck, and we banged on the door, praying that someone was inside. To our relief, a middle-aged man answered, and we quickly explained our situation. He let us in, and the wolves, for reasons unknown, retreated back into the forest. The man told us that he lived there alone, deep in the woods, and that he had encountered these aggressive wolves before. We spent the night in his cabin, thankful for our narrow escape from the silent abyss of the Adirondacks. As we left the next morning, we couldn't help but wonder what had driven these wolves to such aggression. It was a night none of us would ever forget, and it served as a chilling reminder of the unpredictable and perilous nature of the wilderness. Third Story, The Lost Path in Blackwood Forest by James Mitchell. Nestled in the heart of Pennsylvania, Blackwood Forest was renowned for its dense canopy of trees and lush undergrowth. As an experienced hiker, I had explored numerous trails in the state, but Blackwood was different. It had a reputation for being mysterious, with tales of hikers getting lost among its labyrinthine pathways. One cool autumn afternoon, I set out alone to challenge the forest's reputed difficulty. My intention was to prove that the stories were exaggerated, but as I would soon discover, they were not. The forest was eerily quiet, the trees seemed to loom in on me, and the leaves underfoot muffled every step I took. I had taken multiple precautions, marking my trail with colored tape, carrying a GPS device, and even having a map of the forest. However, Blackwood Forest had a way of making even the most experienced hikers disoriented. As I ventured deeper, I noticed that the colored tape I had tied to the trees began to disappear. At first, I brushed it off as wildlife tampering with it, but the reality was far more sinister. After a few hours, I realized I had lost my way. Panic set in as I retraced my steps, but the landscape around me had subtly shifted. Trees that I was sure I had passed before now seemed unfamiliar. The forest seemed to be playing tricks on me. Night descended upon Blackwood, and with it came a creeping sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My flashlight illuminated the dense underbrush, casting eerie shadows on the towering trees that seemed to be closing in on me. I continued to wander, my GPS malfunctioning and my map utterly useless. I shouted for help, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. In the distance, I thought I heard faint, echoing laughter that sent shivers down my spine. As I stumbled through the forest, disorientation gave way to paranoia. Strange sounds echoed through the woods. Whispers, footsteps, and eerie laughter continued to taunt me. I felt like I was being followed, and I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was out there, playing a cruel game with me. Then, I came across a clearing, and my heart sank. In the center of the clearing was a circle of weathered, ancient stones. It looked like an ancient ceremonial site, and the sight of it sent a chill down my spine. The eerie laughter grew louder, echoing through the forest. I knew I had to get out of that place. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, adrenaline surging through my veins. The forest seemed to fight back, with branches and thorns tearing at my clothes. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep me within its embrace. Hours passed, but it felt like an eternity. My strength waned, and the laughter seemed to be closing in. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. Just when I was about to give in to despair, I spotted a faint light in the distance. With the last of my energy, I stumbled towards it, and to my immense relief, I emerged from the oppressive grasp of Blackwood Forest. A park ranger found me, disheveled and exhausted, but alive. I told him about the laughter, the stones, and the eerie feeling of being watched, but he just shook his head and muttered something about Blackwood being a strange place. I never ventured into that forest again. The memory of that day, the whispers, and the unsettling laughter continued to haunt me. Blackwood Forest remained a place of mystery and dread, a realm where the very trees themselves seemed to conspire to lead the lost astray. Fourth Story: The Shadows of Harrow Glen by Emily White. It was a warm summer evening when my boyfriend, Daniel, and I decided to embark on a camping trip in the remote wilderness of Harrow Glen, a vast forest located in the heart of Ohio. The forest was famous for its immense size and the many legends and ghost stories that surrounded it. We were adventurous souls, and we thought it would be an exciting experience to camp there. As we made our way into the heart of the forest, the trees grew taller, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. We found a secluded clearing, set up our camp, and prepared for a night under the stars. The forest was eerily silent, and there was a feeling of solitude that was almost suffocating. We lit our campfire and settled in for the night, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. However, as the night grew darker, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was a sense of unease that crawled under my skin, and I could see Daniel felt it too. In the distance, we began to hear strange noises, footsteps that seemed to echo through the trees. At first, we attributed it to the wildlife, but as the sounds grew closer and more deliberate, it became clear that these were not ordinary forest creatures. Then, the shadows moved. Dark figures emerged from the trees, their presence barely visible in the dim light of the campfire. They were dressed in tattered clothing, and their faces were obscured by the darkness. Their movements were slow and deliberate, as if they were studying us. I whispered to Daniel, "Do you see them?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the approaching figures. We couldn't tell if they were just wanderers or something more sinister, but the tension in the air was palpable. The strangers drew nearer, and I could see the firelight flicker in their eyes, creating an eerie, ghostly glow. They never spoke, only stood there, watching us with a disconcerting stillness. It was as though they were waiting for something. Suddenly, one of them stepped forward, raising a gnarled hand toward us. My heart raced, and I recoiled, but to my surprise, the figure handed us a piece of paper, a weathered map. I took the map, and as I examined it, I realized it was a detailed guide to the forest, including a marked path that would lead us to safety. The strangers, with their indecipherable expressions, seemed to be offering us a lifeline. We thanked them in hushed voices and quickly packed our belongings. With the map in hand, we followed the path they had indicated. As we left the clearing, we glanced back one last time, but the mysterious figures had vanished into the shadows. The path on the map led us through the heart of Harrow Glen, and we couldn't help but wonder who those people were and why they had come to our aid. The forest around us seemed to shift and change, and the shadows that had felt so menacing now guided us to safety. We eventually reached the edge of the forest and found ourselves back in the familiar world of civilization. The memory of those enigmatic figures and the eerie quiet of Harrow Glen stayed with us, a reminder that even in the most remote places, There are mysteries that defy explanation. We never returned to that forest, but the night we spent there would remain etched in our minds as a chilling and inexplicable encounter with the unknown. Fifth Story, The Whispering Wind in Darkshire Woods by Michael Foster. Darkshire Woods in Maine was an enchanting yet eerie place, known for its dense, ancient trees and the constant rustling of leaves that gave the forest its name. One summer, my group of friends and I decided to embark on a camping trip, seeking the thrill of adventure in the heart of Darkshire. Our group consisted of myself, Mark, Sarah, and Jack. We arrived at the forest on a sunny afternoon, with plans to set up camp near a small, serene lake we'd heard about from a local. The tranquility of the forest was captivating as we ventured deeper into its depths, our backpacks laden with camping gear. We arrived at the lake, and it was as picturesque as we'd hoped. The water was clear, and the trees surrounding it seemed to lean in, as if the forest itself was guarding its secret. We set up camp and enjoyed a relaxing afternoon of swimming and lounging by the shore. As evening approached, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter. The sun began to set, and the once bright forest grew darker and more ominous. The wind picked up, causing the trees to sway and whisper in the fading light. It was during this moment that we heard it, the distinct sound of a woman's voice, soft and mournful, carried on the breeze. We exchanged puzzled looks, trying to locate the source of the voice. The forest seemed to come alive with whispers, as if secrets long buried were being revealed. We ventured into the woods, drawn by the sound of the voice. The voices became more distinct, and the unease in the pit of my stomach grew. It was as though we were being lured deeper into the forest by an invisible force. Mark suggested that it might be a fellow camper, lost or in distress, and we felt compelled to help. As we continued, the whispers grew louder, yet we couldn't pinpoint their origin. Shadows danced in the darkening woods, and the voice, still sorrowful, seemed to beckon us forward. It was surreal, like a scene from a horror movie, and our nerves were on edge. Finally, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin hidden in the depths of the forest. The voice, now clear and plaintive, emanated from within. We hesitated at the cabin's doorstep, unsure of what we might find. Slowly, we pushed open the creaking door. Inside, the cabin was in a state of disrepair, with cobwebs and dust covering everything. But it was what we saw in the corner that made our blood run cold. A weathered journal, open to a page with a heartbreaking story of a woman who had been lost in the forest many years ago. The story spoke of her despair, her voice lost to the woods. As I read aloud, the wind outside the cabin intensified, and the whispers grew more insistent. We knew that we needed to leave, and we fled the cabin, the voices still echoing in our ears. As we returned to our campsite, the voices faded into the distance, and the wind died down. We couldn't shake the feeling that we had encountered something otherworldly, a lingering presence in the forest that had trapped a lost soul for eternity. We spent a restless night, our dreams filled with the haunting voice and the ancient journal. When morning came, we quickly packed our belongings and left Darkshire Woods behind. The forest had shown us a side that we had not expected, a place where the wind whispered secrets, and the past was never truly buried. Our camping trip had become a journey into the mysteries of the woods, and it was a tale we would never forget. Sixth Story, The Isolation of Lost Cove by Olivia Bennett. Lost Cove, tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, had long been a place of mystery and intrigue. It was a remote and forgotten village, abandoned decades ago, and the perfect destination for those seeking isolation in the wilderness. Little did I know, the solitude of Lost Cove would test the limits of my courage. I had always been fascinated by the stories of the village, and so I embarked on a solo camping trip, eager to explore its eerie remains. The drive to Lost Cove was arduous, leading me deep into the mountains, far from the conveniences of modern life. The winding, unpaved road seemed endless, but I was determined to reach my destination. After hours of driving, I finally arrived in Lost Cove, parking my car near the remnants of an old cabin. The forest pressed in on all sides, and I could feel the weight of its history bearing down on me. The village had been abandoned long ago, leaving behind decaying structures and a profound sense of desolation. I set up my camp near an old church, the walls of which were covered in ivy and marked with the passage of time. As night fell, I lit a small fire and settled in, captivated by the solitude and the echoes of the past that seemed to whisper through the trees. The forest was eerily quiet, and the sensation of being watched hung heavily in the air. As I sat by the fire, strange sounds reached my ears, a faint rustling of leaves, footsteps that seemed to come from all directions. I brushed it off as my imagination, attributing the sounds to the solitude and the creaking of the ancient trees. But as the night deepened, the sounds grew more insistent. I realized that I was not alone. Shadows danced at the edge of my campsite, figures obscured by the darkness. Fear clenched at my heart as I heard hushed whispers that were not of this world. I gathered my courage and ventured towards the voices, finding myself in the ruins of a long-forgotten cabin. There, in the dim light of my flashlight, I saw them, ghostly figures, the remnants of the village's past. They moved silently, going about their business as if I were not there. I could see children playing, adults tending to their homes, and a sense of normalcy in the midst of abandonment. The air was thick with the echoes of laughter and everyday life, as if time had not moved forward in Lost Cove. I tried to interact with the apparitions, but they seemed unaware of my presence. Their voices were indistinct, their faces obscured. It was a haunting reminder of the village's past, trapped in a perpetual loop of existence. Terrified and unsettled, I returned to my campsite, hoping to escape the phantoms of Lost Cove. But the voices and figures followed me, shadows lurking at the edge of my campfire's light. The forest had become a place of isolation and echoes, where the past bled into the present. As the night wore on, I felt a growing unease and dread. The whispering voices persisted, and it was clear that I was not welcome in this place of forgotten souls. With the first light of dawn, I packed my belongings and left Lost Cove behind, the weight of its history lingering on my mind. Lost Cove had been a journey into the unknown, a place where time and space converged, and the past could not be buried. It was a place of solitude, but also a place of haunting isolation, where the echoes of lives long past refused to fade away. 7th Story, The Ominous Apparitions of Willowdale Woods by Daniel Carter. Willowdale Woods, a sprawling forest in the heart of New Hampshire, was notorious for its eeriness and tales of strange occurrences. I was always drawn to the mysterious, and had heard whispers of apparitions and unsettling phenomena in the forest. So, with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, I decided to camp in Willowdale one summer. I ventured into the woods alone, my camping gear in tow, eager to uncover the truth behind the tales. The forest was dense, with towering trees that seemed to block out the sun. Shadows loomed in every direction, and the feeling of being watched was inescapable. I set up camp near a small, crystal-clear stream, the only source of water for miles. The forest silence was broken only by the gentle babbling of the brook, a soothing but eerie contrast to the oppressive stillness. As night fell, I lit a campfire and settled in, determined to keep a vigilant watch. The forest around me seemed to come alive with subtle movements, as if something or someone was lurking just out of sight. I had barely settled in when the first apparition appeared. It was a shadowy figure, barely visible in the darkness, moving silently among the trees. I couldn't make out any distinct features, but I could feel its presence. My heart raced as the figure moved closer, its movements deliberate and purposeful. I considered calling out, but fear held my voice captive. The apparition was soon joined by another, then another, until there were several shadowy figures moving around my campfire. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but it was as if they were trying to communicate with me through their actions. The figures gestured and pointed, moving with an eerie fluidity. I realized they were guiding me, leading me deeper into the forest. I was torn between fear and curiosity, but something about their presence made me feel strangely compelled to follow. As I ventured further into the woods, the figures continued to guide me, their movements synchronized and purposeful. The forest grew denser, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, making it increasingly difficult to discern their forms. The figures finally led me to a small clearing, where a gnarled tree stood, its branches reaching out like twisted fingers. At the base of the tree, there was a crude, makeshift grave. The figures seemed to be pointing at the grave, as if they were revealing a hidden secret. I approached the grave with a growing sense of unease. The forest was oppressive, and the shadows closed in around me. As I looked down, I saw a name etched into the grave, a name that I recognized as my own. Panic surged through me, and I turned to confront the shadowy figures, but they had vanished. I was left alone in the chilling darkness of Willowdale Woods, with the unnerving realization that the apparitions had shown me a glimpse of my own fate. I quickly packed my belongings and fled from the forest, the name on the grave still haunting my thoughts. Willowdale Woods had proven to be a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred, a place where eerie apparitions whispered their unsettling secrets. The experience left me with more questions than answers, and I knew that the enigmatic forest held mysteries that I may never fully comprehend. 8th Story, The Unseen Eyes of Ravenwood Forest by Laura Stevens. Ravenwood Forest, located in the heart of West Virginia, was a place steeped in both beauty and foreboding. Its towering trees and moss-covered rocks gave it an otherworldly allure, but it was also known for its tales of the unseen eyes that watched those who ventured too deep into its heart. With a curiosity I couldn't ignore, I embarked on a camping trip to Ravenwood one autumn. My hiking companions, Jane and Mark, shared my fascination with the mysterious forest. We set out on a crisp, clear day, the leaves crunching beneath our boots as we hiked deeper into the woods. The beauty of the forest was undeniable, with the warm hues of autumn enveloping us. As the day turned to night, we set up our campsite near a babbling brook. The atmosphere was tranquil, and the air was crisp, but the sensation of being watched never left me. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every so often, as though expecting to catch a glimpse of those unseen eyes. As we sat around the campfire, the feeling of unease intensified. We exchanged nervous glances and whispered about the legends of Ravenwood. The stories spoke of unseen observers who watched from the shadows, their intent unknown. As we prepared for bed, we heard it, a faint, whispering voice, too low to make out the words. The forest around us seemed to echo with this haunting murmur, and our hearts raced. We fumbled for our flashlights and scanned the darkness, but there was nothing to be seen. The whispering persisted, growing closer and more insistent. We were not alone, and the sense of being observed became overwhelming. Panic set in as we realized that the voices were now all around us, and there was no source to be found. We knew that we couldn't stay in our tents. Gathering our courage, we decided to follow the sounds, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The whispers seemed to lead us deeper into the forest, the atmosphere growing heavier with each step. As we ventured further, we saw them, flickering shadows that moved just beyond the reach of our flashlights. They seemed to be observing us, their eyes glowing like ethereal embers. The more we tried to approach, the further they retreated, staying just beyond our grasp. The forest seemed to close in around us, and the trees took on a menacing quality, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. We were surrounded by the unseen eyes, their presence both eerie and suffocating. The shadows began to whisper in a chorus, their words unintelligible but filled with an unsettling resonance. We knew that we had to escape, but the forest seemed to conspire against us, leading us deeper into its heart. After what felt like hours, we finally emerged from Ravenwood Forest, our hearts pounding and our minds filled with a profound sense of dread. The unseen eyes had watched us, their motives and intentions unclear. Ravenwood Forest had proven to be a place of beauty and eerie fascination, a place where whispers and shadows danced on the edge of perception. The experience left us with a chilling sense of having been observed by a presence beyond our understanding, a presence that would forever remain unseen. 9th Story, The Enigmatic Ritual in Hallowed Pines by Jacob Thompson. Hallowed Pines, a remote forest in the heart of Georgia, was known for its enigmatic past and strange occurrences. I was always drawn to tales of the unusual, so I decided to explore the mysteries of Hallowed Pines on a solo camping trip one summer. The forest was unlike any I had seen, with towering pines that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. As I ventured deeper into the woods, a strange quietness enveloped me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing in a sacred place. I set up my camp near an ancient stone circle, its origins shrouded in mystery. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, and I felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath. As night fell, I lit a campfire and settled in, ready to embrace the enigma of Hallowed Pines. It wasn't long before I began to hear faint, distant chanting, a melodic, otherworldly hymn that seemed to resonate through the trees. The forest was alive with movement, shadows darting just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sounds of the chanting, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. I soon found myself in a clearing, where a group of people had gathered around a fire. They were dressed in flowing robes, and their faces were hidden by masks. The chant grew louder, and the air was charged with a sense of reverence and ritual. As I watched from the shadows, I realized that I was witnessing an enigmatic ceremony. The figures moved with purpose, and their movements seemed to be part of a carefully orchestrated dance. Symbols and strange incantations were etched into the ground, and the fire burned with an eerie blue flame. The participants in the ritual seemed to be in a trance, their voices merging into a haunting, hypnotic chorus. I couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They were invoking forces beyond the realm of the ordinary. Suddenly, one of the figures noticed me, and their eyes locked onto mine. I felt a shiver of dread as they approached, the others turning to regard me with curiosity. The atmosphere grew charged with tension, and I realized that I had intruded on something beyond my comprehension. The figure who had approached me spoke in a voice that sent chills down my spine. "You have seen too much," they said, their words both a warning and an invitation. In a state of unease, I left the clearing and returned to my campsite, but the chanting and the enigmatic ritual continued throughout the night, filling the forest with an otherworldly presence. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, and I knew that I had witnessed something far beyond my understanding. As dawn broke, the forest fell silent, and the robed figures had vanished. Hallowed Pines remained a place of enigma and the unknown, a forest that held secrets and rituals that defied explanation. The experience left me with a sense of having glimpsed a world hidden just beyond the veil of the ordinary, a world of hallowed pines and its enigmatic mysteries. 10th Story, The Haunting Echoes of Fiddler Hollow by Sarah Reynolds. Fiddler Hollow, located in the depths of the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee, was a place notorious for its eerie history. With its ancient trees and tales of strange occurrences, it had long piqued my curiosity. One crisp autumn evening, I set out on a solo camping trip, eager to unravel the mysteries of Fiddler Hollow. The forest was vast and enveloped in an eerie silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves underfoot. As I ventured deeper, the trees seemed to lean in closer, as if the forest itself was watching my every move. I chose a remote clearing near a small, meandering creek to set up my camp. The atmosphere was serene, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, expecting to catch a glimpse of the unseen presence that lurked in the shadows. As night fell, I lit a campfire and settled in, determined to experience the enigma of Fiddler Hollow. It wasn't long before I began to hear it, the distant, mournful strains of a violin. The music was hauntingly beautiful, drifting through the forest like a siren's call. The violin's melody was enchanting, yet tinged with a deep sorrow. It spoke of loss, longing, and a yearning for something beyond reach. The forest around me seemed to come alive, as if the very trees were swaying to the mournful tune. I decided to follow the sound, my flashlight illuminating my path. The violin's music grew louder and more insistent, guiding me deeper into the heart of the forest. It was as if the forest itself wanted me to witness the source of this ethereal music. After a while, I came upon an old, overgrown cemetery. In the center, a single gravestone stood, and next to it sat a figure, playing the violin with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. The figure's face was obscured, and their presence seemed to transcend the ordinary. I watched in awe as the music filled the clearing. It was a performance like no other, the violinists pouring their soul into the haunting melody. The atmosphere was thick with emotion, and I felt as though I had stumbled upon a timeless moment, a connection to a world beyond the veil. But as the music reached its crescendo, the figure turned to me, their eyes meeting mine. There was a deep sadness in their gaze, a plea for understanding. Without words, they conveyed a profound sense of loss and longing, a connection to a past that could never be reclaimed. As the music faded, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving me with a sense of having witnessed something that transcended the ordinary. Fiddler Hollow had revealed its haunting echoes, a place where the past lingered, and the violin's mournful notes carried the weight of history. I returned to my campsite, the forest now wrapped in a contemplative silence. The experience had left me with a profound sense of connection to the mysteries of Fiddler Hollow, a place where the echoes of the past and the yearning of lost souls continued to resonate. 11th Story, The Haunting Shadows of Whispering Pines by Ethan Richardson. Whispering Pines, a sprawling forest nestled in the heart of Alabama, was a place known for its dense canopy of ancient trees and the unsettling tales of shadowy figures that haunted its depths. One fateful summer, my friends and I decided to test our courage and embarked on a camping trip in the eerie woods of Whispering Pines. Our group consisted of myself, Emily, Jake, and Mia. The forest was thick with foliage, and the air was heavy with the scent of moss and earth. We set up camp near a tranquil, moonlit pond, the perfect setting for a night of storytelling and stargazing. As darkness fell, we gathered around the campfire, sharing tales and laughter. The warmth of the fire was a comforting contrast to the oppressive stillness of the forest. Yet the shadows cast by the flickering flames seemed to reach out towards the woods, as if beckoning something beyond our world. It wasn't long before we began to hear it, the faint rustling of leaves, as though something was moving in the woods just beyond our campsite. The sounds grew closer, and the atmosphere turned tense as we strained our ears to listen. We dismissed the sounds as the wind or perhaps wildlife, but as the night wore on, they became more distinct and deliberate. It was as if someone, or something, was watching us, creeping ever closer. Then we saw them, shadowy figures, lurking in the tree line. They were just beyond the reach of our campfire's light, their forms obscured and indistinct. They moved silently, their eyes reflecting the fire's glow with an eerie, unblinking luminescence. Fear settled in as we watched the figures draw nearer. We knew they were not ordinary forest creatures. Their movements were deliberate, and their presence was unsettling. We whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. As the figures encircled our camp, they began to whisper among themselves, their voices low and unintelligible. The words seemed to hang in the air, filled with a sense of foreboding. We couldn't understand their intent, but the tension in the forest was palpable. Then one of the figures stepped into the light, revealing a pale, gaunt face and dark, hollow eyes. It gazed at us with a malevolence that sent a shiver down our spines. We realized that these were not ordinary people but something otherworldly, something that didn't belong in our realm. Panicked, we decided to leave our campsite, hoping to escape the haunting shadows that surrounded us. With flashlights in hand, we stumbled through the dark woods, the eerie whispers following us as we went. Hours passed, and our strength began to wane. The figures continued to pursue us, their movements relentless. We couldn't shake the feeling that they were leading us further into the depths of Whispering Pines. Finally, just when we were on the brink of exhaustion, we stumbled upon a remote cabin. It was a stroke of luck, and we desperately pounded on the door, praying that someone was inside. A middle-aged woman answered, and we quickly explained our situation. She let us in, and the shadowy figures, for reasons unknown, retreated back into the forest. The woman told us that she lived there alone, deep in the woods, and that she had encountered these ominous figures before. We spent the night in her cabin, grateful for our narrow escape from the haunting shadows of Whispering Pines. As we left the next morning, we couldn't help but wonder about the enigmatic figures and the secrets of the forest. Whispering Pines had proven to be a place of dark mysteries and eerie encounters, a realm where shadowy figures watched from the depths of the woods, leaving us with a sense of having glimpsed something beyond the boundaries of our world. Twelfth Story, The Uncanny Silence of Midnight Oaks by Olivia Harrison. Midnight Oaks, a sprawling forest in Louisiana, had always been a place of strange occurrences and unsettling legends. One summer, my group of friends and I decided to spend a night camping in the heart of Midnight Oaks. The forest was known for its eerie silence, and we were eager to uncover the secrets that lay within. Our group consisted of myself, Alex, Sarah, and David. The forest was dense and shrouded in a heavy silence as we set up our campsite near a moonlit glade. The night was clear, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and leaves. As we gathered around the campfire, the sense of solitude was almost suffocating. The quiet of the forest was eerie, with even the usual sounds of night creatures conspicuously absent. The trees seemed to press in around us, their long, gnarled branches casting elongated shadows. Our campfire was the only source of light and warmth, but it was not enough to dispel the unsettling feeling that we were being watched. The sense of unease lingered as we huddled together, sharing stories and laughter. As the night deepened, the forest's silence became more pronounced. It was as though nature itself had fallen into a deep slumber, leaving us alone in the midst of an uncanny hush. The stillness was so profound that even our whispers felt out of place. In the distance, we began to hear a faint, rhythmic thudding. It was a sound that seemed to come from the heart of the forest, growing louder with each passing moment. We strained to identify the source of the noise, but it remained elusive. We decided to follow the sound, our flashlights piercing the darkness. The thudding led us deeper into the woods, where the trees seemed to close in around us, creating an eerie tunnel of branches and shadows. Finally, we came upon a small, moonlit clearing, and what we saw there left us breathless. In the center of the clearing was an enormous, ancient oak tree, its massive trunk twisted and covered in moss. Its roots spread out like grotesque fingers, and they seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. But what truly left us in awe was the source of the rhythmic thudding, a group of people encircling the tree, dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothing. They moved in unison, their bodies swaying as they chanted an eerie, wordless hymn. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, and their faces were marked by an unsettling serenity. We watched in astonishment as the group's movements became more frenzied, and the chant grew louder and more intense. It was as though they were engaged in some uncanny ritual, something that defied explanation. The air was charged with an eerie energy, and the ancient oak tree seemed to come to life, its gnarled branches reaching out towards the sky. We felt as though we were witnessing a convergence of the natural world and the supernatural. As the ritual reached its climax, the group of people fell silent, their eyes locking onto us. It was as if they had been unaware of our presence until that moment. Their stares were intense, filled with an unspoken message that we could not decipher. Panic set in, and we fled the clearing, the thudding noise fading into the distance. As we returned to our campsite, the forest's silence seemed even more oppressive, and the sense of having glimpsed something otherworldly stayed with us. Midnight Oaks had proven to be a place of uncanny silence and enigmatic rituals, a realm where the border between the natural and the supernatural blurred. The experience left us with a sense of having touched the very heart of the forest's mysteries, a place where the unexplainable was woven into the fabric of nature itself. Thank you for sticking with us through the whole video. Also, I recommend you this video you see on screen, one of the scariest on my channel. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. This helps me bring you more thrilling content every day. If this video sent shivers down your spine, let me know in the comments.